explore developments in our world and what they could mean for the future. In this relatively impromptu interview, I am joined by Chamira Gamage, a human rights advocate at Amnesty International who has been instrumental in campaigning and lobbying for the Assange campaign globally. He has taken a complex and at times unpopular case and ensured it was being given the attention it deserves, based on the core principles of press freedom, freedom of expression, and the impact it has on us all, both now and in the future. Chamira is also the co-founder and CEO of Thinkers, a critical thinking Chrome extension and soon-to-come news app, which helps users consider context as they read in order to help them become better informed. Chamira, thank you very much for joining me.
Sam, absolute pleasure, and thanks for having me. Glad to finally be here.
Yeah. It's funny how this turned out. We don't need to get into it, but it's it makes me happy. It makes me happy. So before we get into the meat of it, I would like you just to tell me a bit about your background and what Amnesty International does.
Sure. Yeah. In terms of my background, I've always been quite passionate about human rights and fighting injustice for different people around the world. My background actually started in a small country town called Armidale, which is in regional New South Wales here in Australia, quite a small town. And we had some good influences from my father and the diverse town that it was. But I know that human rights was always drilled in, quite early on in my upbringing. So it did influence the career decisions I chose, and I decided to study international law at uni for postgrad. I've done some sort of youth work on the ground back in Armidale as well. But I suppose, joining Amnesty about 3.5 years ago for me was a massive turning point, as it was a bit of a full circle from my experience and interests, coming together at the largest human rights organization in the world, which was quite appropriate and a great opportunity, which I'm really grateful for. Joining Amnesty, there were so many issues that I was quite passionate about. They ranged from, refugees, both Manus and Nauru here in Australia, the Rohingyas, in Myanmar, and certainly, the case of Julian Assange. And a big reason for that, for me, was the importance of information and the role that it plays in our perception, our actions each and every day, and the way that we see the world, which I think is one of the most foundational aspects of who we are and what makes up our society, particularly in an online world. So I kind of took that case, I suppose, and campaign and ran with it internally. And as I mentioned, as the largest organization fighting for this, Amnesty works and operates in about 150 countries around the world. So there's a lot of interconnectedness, not just in Australia and the issues we work on, but we are able to influence, and stand up and impact issues that also, relate to people in America, the global South, wherever it may be. And I think that was one of the most appealing things for me, to know that there is a knock-on effect from small actions. And that's something that, a lot of people say, but it's something that I've seen firsthand now on so many occasions that I can't help but repeat it whenever I, talk to someone and they say, oh, what's the point? What's the point of doing this little action or signing a petition? So yeah, it's obviously a unique and highly impactful organization based on the values of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights from 1948, which have pretty much underpinned, the glue between nations from that time until now. And while it isn't a perfect system, it's the best one I think we've had yet, and that says a lot. And also played a big role in sort of my choice to work at Amnesty and sort of champion these issues with everything I've got.
Yeah, it's one of the strongest memes, like this, the notion of human rights. It's like something that really dominates, I guess, our conscious these days. Just thinking like you usually hear people say, depending on the context of the conversation, but I have a human right to do this. Like, it's not really the case for lots of other things, but they've really kind of cemented themselves
absolutely
in the conscience of the consciousness of I guess modern day people. So yeah, I'm really appreciative of that work. So the Julian Assange and the what's been going on over the past decade or so. It's quite a complex. It's quite a complex thing, and
Absolutely.
a lot of people probably have varying degrees of understanding of the story, of what's at stake. So I think it would be good for us to just kind of just go through it all.
Yeah.
You know, not in deep detail, but in enough detail so that people can find out what happened, and what's happened since because of those actions, and then what are the implications of the trials that have happened and the ones that are coming. So I guess to kick this off, how did the whole saga begin? Who is Julian Assange, and what is WikiLeaks?
Yeah, sounds good. So, as many people may know, Julian is an Australian citizen. First and foremost, he started off, I think, early days in his life and career being quite, interested in computers and what some might call hacking, at that point as well. And so certainly learnt different aspects of engaging with powerful organizations. But from what I understand, not going too far with that, but certainly had the skills. Over time, I think there was a sentiment that, again, is kind of grounded the information sort of ecosystem that we all participate in now. And that is that, large mainstream organizations, large institutions that are kind of the pillars of our society, including governments, academia, trusted bodies, whatever it may be, generally are the ones that push forward the narratives, the information on what is going on in the world. WikiLeaks started in the 2000s, and it was actually Julian who put that together in order to, I think it was initially called leaks.org or leaks.com, but the intention was to promote whistleblowing and ensure that the true story was being shared to the public. So it wasn't just a sort of narrow window of what's going on. There's another consideration of the story. And obviously that posed a huge threat to those institutions, particularly governments. Now, I'm the first person to say that the importance of government in our societies is incredibly important. The system that we have at the moment as well is again, not perfect, but comes with a lot of positives and affords us the life that we are able to live today. At the same time, accountability and eternal vigilance, as they say, is what holds democracy together. And again, if the information we're receiving in making decisions, in casting our vote at the polling booths, are all based on the same sort of narrow window, maybe it's 30-40% of what's actually happening, that's going to create a pretty predictable, I would say, outcome for people who are voting. The conversations that happen whilst we have these sort of debates within these narrow windows, I feel as though there's a whole other smorgasbord of issues that we can discuss. So WikiLeaks, in that spirit, wanted to release as much information as possible so that we could make up our minds ourselves. Now, obviously, with that comes some risks. There are the risks that you're putting other people's lives at danger, which is a common sort of statement put forward by people that do oppose WikiLeaks and Assange. None of that has been proven in a court of law as yet. So I just wanted to discredit that initially.
Just to jump in quickly, WikiLeaks, I guess an important point to make is they don't publish stories. They don't create a narrative with the information that they have at hand, but they just publish the documents that are provided to them, right? So that this is what the US government's got, or this is what any other sort of institution, these are their documents.
100%.
Here they are, make your own determinations.
100%. Yeah, it's exactly. So I like to say it's straight from the horse's mouth, right? It's journalism is a fantastic practice, and it's the fourth estate. It's incredibly important, to ensure that democracy functions well. But there's individual biases, there's organizational biases, there's all sorts of aspects that can sway the message and the truth, let's say. So with WikiLeaks, the benefit is It's all there. It's all right there for you to make your mind up. There's no this or that. Also want to mention that, none of the information that's ever been released has ever been proven to be wrong. It's never been proved to be a lie or falsified. So it really is as true as it gets, and that could open up other conversations about the blockchain and how we can ensure that information is correct. But that's probably for another episode. But
or at the very end, let's see how much time we got.
We got a
can
couple
get
more
into
hours,
it, maybe.
Yeah. But at the time, that was the best sort of method, and it was new, and it was a new method, and did work, but it did obviously ruffle feathers. So, with that in mind, the most notable drops or leaks were in 2010, and this is what the current extradition trial and case generally refers back to, which are the Iraq war logs in 2010. Also in the same year were the Afghanistan war logs, and in 2011, there was so Guantanamo Bay was 2010, but actually a lot of those leaks did have some impact, not just in our perception and how we saw the world, but it had demonstrable effect on people power and mobilization. The Arab Springs was said to have been influenced by some of the leaks, during that time in 2011, and obviously the sort of lens that was put on America after the Guantanamo Bay leaks were put forward, changed the narrative and the psyche, across the globe. In 2010, with the war logs, collateral murder was actually the most interesting video, and I think while it was quite graphic, it really highlighted the nature of war. Obviously, as we understand, there are rules in war that are broken, quite often. But this was perfect evidence of what US soldiers were doing in the name of US citizens and in the name of what they were supposedly fighting for. And in that video, they actually gunned down civilians who were Reuters journalists, who were absolutely, collateral damage as far as they were concerned. There was laughter. There was, it was sort of, it went forward as a bit of a game. So that was quite shocking, but really was the pinpoint for the extent of what WikiLeaks could reveal, and also the embarrassment for the US government of what the world could then see they were doing without their subversion of information. So,
yeah, and you said collateral murder. That sounds like an oxymoron for some reason,
Yeah,
It's
exactly.
like it doesn't fit. So he released those. So 2 points. One is, was WikiLeaks registered in the US, or is it a registered organization?
I believe so. Yeah.
Okay.
And, I know that he was operating in Australia for some time and in London, but I think one of the biggest sort of questions here, and the main thing to be worried about in this circumstance is what precedent this sets when you've got somebody who's an Australian citizen based in Australia doing some of this work, even in London doing some of this work, or in the UK in general, and you've got a third party such as America who can overreach, pluck that person, through charges, subvert international law on a number of counts, and then put them on trial for really
in their own country. It's
exactly.
Yeah, it's like us picking some guy up from Sweden, being like, "We don't like what you're doing. Come on over here, and we're going to put you behind bars."
100%.
Okay,
and
so,
I think, and just to finish that point, I think it's good to kind of follow that thread as to where that can lead if this is to continue, because if Saudi Arabia or China were to do the same thing, you can absolutely do, so the outcome can be quite similar. You can pluck somebody else from Brazil, you can pluck somebody else from London, just for sort of speaking against your country or releasing something that was in the public's right to know, and you wouldn't be protected. So it is a bit of a pivotal crossroads and turning point, I feel, this case, and echoed by a lot of people. Obviously, a lot of years have led to this moment, and that's what we're fighting for more than anything, is to make people aware of how this can actually impact them as individuals. So.
Yeah. Okay, so we'll dive deeper into that towards the end of this. So WikiLeaks releases these documents. There's a lot of outcry, embarrassment on behalf of the US government. What happens then?
Sorry, could you just repeat the last part?
Yeah, so what happens? Like, what happened after that? These documents released, there was public outcry.
Yeah.
How did he come to be detained?
Yeah,
I mean, maybe not the specifics, but the locations and like what's the chain of events here?
100%. So, during that time, there was some allegations that were put forward against Julian during his time in Sweden, which obviously made some headlines, and also started to reshape the narrative of who Julian Assange was and how he was defined in the public media. So a lot of the other aspects of what WikiLeaks had done, etc., were kind of not as front and center as let's say the allegations. Now, they were quite complex themselves, and without going into it in too much detail, that sort of case led to the US wanting to basically extradite him back to America and make sure that he was sort of held accountable for that, and that process went through the legal process itself. It was a complex time, as there wasn't. First of all, the statute of limitations ran out after some time, and there wasn't evidence put forward that was sufficient in the judge's eyes. At the same time, Assange then had basically laid out the roadmap of what he thought would take place or transpire over the coming period of time, which is pretty much exactly how it's gone so far. He suspected, the US would do whatever they could to try and to find a way to extradite him back. And so he therefore was quite, while he was as cooperative as he could be and willing to go online and answer any questions and go through that process, he was obviously risk averse to show himself, in London and sort of, allow himself to be easily taken in by the US. So at that time, he was considered a refugee and was seeking asylum. He actually then was taken up by Ecuador, the Ecuadorian embassy. I believe Carrera was the president at the time. It was 2012. And he was quite favorable to Assange and his plight. Actually, at that time, there was quite a lot of countries that were vying to provide asylum to Assange. So it wasn't just Ecuador. It was quite a common understanding that he was a political prisoner, that he was being persecuted and sort of chased after, right? So Ecuador took him in, and he was granted asylum there for roughly 7 years. During that time, he did.
We're talking like 7 years in an embassy.
Yeah.
Not able to leave, because if he was to leave, he could have been picked up by the British police force and then taken away. So 7 years in what I can imagine to be quite a cramped, not a very nice building.
Yeah.
Just a prisoner, really.
Absolutely. And during that time as well, it wasn't the easiest stay or, the most normal or comfortable stay that, as you would imagine. There was actually quite some evidence of spying during that time. I believe that when he was given up, I would say, by the Ecuadorian government in 2019 and taken into Belmar prison, it was a different president at that time.
I remember reading then that the president that came in, the president that came in afterwards. Yes. I mean, I'm just remembering things that came in that I read in 2019, so I could be completely off. But I think he was a lot more aligned or sympathetic to the US, and I think he had some. Maybe his rise to presidency might have been involved. I don't really know, but I remember him getting in, and then shortly afterwards, they're like, "All right, Assange,
see you later.
You've overstayed your welcome." Yeah.
Pretty much. It didn't take long, and some of the stories that are given, and again, it's all about how it's painted, right? Is that he was a bit of a troublesome guest during his stay, that he had leaked funnily enough, information about the president of Ecuador and videos related to corruption. So he was continuing the sort of the purpose of WikiLeaks, which was to, regardless of who you are, what side, it's not about partisanship. Once again, it's about what's taking place. Is it breaking the law? It's the public's right to know. So he was following that, and with all that in mind, the president did I would say give him up to London, and the sort of excuse, in a sense, was him skipping bail. Right, so that was that. Based on that, they basically gave him up, and funnily enough, not long after, the IMF granted Ecuador quite a nice lump sum loan in the I think around $4 to $5 billion. So yeah, it was an interesting time, and the previous president of Ecuador was quite critical of that process, and so I think it does say a lot about how diplomacy can take place behind the scenes. But yeah, that process was obviously condemned by so many countries once again around the world. It was again playing out the process that was predicted early days when Assange was reluctant to go into London courts and sort of discuss these issues face to face. So yeah, that process obviously was anticipated, and it is kicked off, I guess, the last 2 years of the trial, of more information coming about, and a big ramp up from organizations like Amnesty and others around the world that wanted to do everything they can to stop this extradition.
So they kicked him out of they let him go from the embassy. He gets picked up by the London police, and he gets taken to what's called Belmarsh. Is that right?
Prison, yeah. And just a bit of context on Belmarsh as well. It's not there's not that there is a light-hearted prison around, but it's certainly not the easiest one to be staying in. It's actually one saved for some of the highest end criminals, murderers, and some of the worst people around, really. And so Assange was thrown in there in a small cell, which again was obviously quite a big gesture, and was a message that was being sent to a lot of other prospective journalists or publishers around the world about how they'd be treated if similar publishing was to take place. There's no reason for him to be kept in a prison like that, a super high max prison, and from what I understand, and the UN actually verified this. The special rapporteur on torture, Niels Melzer, who's been quite vocal in his support of releasing Assange and condemning his treatment, is that he actually was being psychologically tortured in Belmarsh. So the environment, the conditions, his treatment and restrictions all amounted to psychological torture. So, and I don't think that gets enough attention.
No, I mean, that's widely regarded as illegal, right? Like
exactly.
it's against human rights. It's like the Guantanamo Bay thing, the stuff he released.
Yeah, exactly. It's there's no grounds for it. Obviously, those reports were not just were done with independent analysts as well, who came in to gauge his psyche. So as you can imagine, anybody held in a prison like that for quite some time, it's obviously going to be detrimental to your psyche. Even physically, it's going to be quite detrimental. I believe it can get extremely cold in there, and he was refused, jumpers, and there was no heating. So it's obviously quite a concerted process. And talking to Stella, his partner, she was echoing actually the treatment and how bad the conditions were. So it's actually gotten to a point where it's it's kind of going by day, just trying to survive, and doing everything you can using your will and perseverance to kind of not give up. And that's why it's more important now than ever that the trial doesn't go forward, that the extradition doesn't happen, and the charges are dropped, because as every day goes on, it's already now been over 2 years, the likelihood of that health getting far worse is just increasing over and over. So
yeah, I guess I'm just trying to understand. I mean, I guess if he dies, then
Mm.
they've got less to worry about. And this seems kind of
Correct.
sadistic, to put someone through this for doing something which I
Yeah.
think most people would think he has every right to do, and we are all better off for it.
Yes.
This treatment does not strike me as, I mean, if we were to just replace America with China as the country that was perpetrating this, imagine how people would be reacting,
Oh,
right?
absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah, it's funny. Again, it's funny how that how it can play into a narrative of a country, or the good guys or the bad guys. So
Mm.
you would think that that would be the best outcome. It would be like, let's remove the problem. But I do think that it would just be too overt, and there would just be, now that there's enough spotlight on, Assange, his treatment, what he represents. For a lot of people, it's not about Julian himself. It's about what he represents, the direction the world will go in if he is to be charged. And I think America's very aware of that. I think China has actually leveraged that as a great sort of left jab against them. They always talk about, you can't really condemn us when you have a journalist held right now in Belmar for so long. What about the Assange situation? So I think it would just be far too overt. I think it's a slow burn, clear message over many years to others, and it is a bit of payback. In a sense, when you look at the way that people like Pompeo, people in the CIA have spoken about Julian, Hillary Clinton herself, even Trump himself, people from all sides, but at high levels in government, it's always with quite a bit of disdain. There's comments about, why don't we drone the guy? I think, only a few weeks ago, there was actually evidence revealed and released that the CIA was plotting to assassinate Assange in 2017 while he was in the embassy, Ecuadorian embassy. And some of the wording there was, nothing's off the table. Do what you need to do creatively to figure out how to solve this problem. So, it's what a lot of people suspect, I would say. I think most people aren't stupid. They know that this is probably what goes on at certain levels. But it's,
Jeffrey Epstein.
There you go, JE, right? So,
yeah.
And not to draw parallels, but we really hope that there's no scenarios like that. And it's to highlight the significance again. It represents freedom of speech. It represents freedom of expression. It represents freedom of media and the press, right? And I think he really is the pivotal case and example for all of those different freedoms that we've held so dearly for so long, and the trajectory in which all of that can change if he is to be extradited.
It's absolutely wild that a man, he's probably stepped foot in the US, I don't know, but an Australian guy who's done something to piss off a government can just, because it's or it was the global hegemon, like the big superpower that could basically do what it wants. They can just say, right, bring this guy over here. We are going to charge him for whatever, because we don't like what he's done. And we're going to put him behind bars for, I think, 175 years? That's the maximum penalty he could get.
That's it. Yeah. So obviously more than a death sentence, and that's the first time, just to highlight as well, that the Espionage Act has actually been used against a journalist in the 102 years that it's been around, and he is on trial for about 17, I believe, charges under that act.
So I know that you might not be too deep in the weeds with regards to the law here, but
sure.
He's publishing stuff that's been given to him.
Correct.
Right? Like, that's what he's been doing. He hasn't been hacking. He's not, doesn't have his anonymous mask on, sitting there at 3 a.m. hacking into servers. Someone's whistleblowers have given him info, and then he's hit publish. And he has, so a lot of the criticisms that have been aimed or, thrown at him have been around the fact that the information in those documents could have endangered people, right? But I think before when we spoke about this, you said that he did try to expunge some names from these documents, but there were just so many, and
Yeah,
there's like a balancing act, right?
100%. It actually was. There's a specific example with lawyer Mark Davis, who was working with Julian quite closely, and the example he gave, I think he had video footage as well of them staying up till about 4 a.m., 5 a.m. in the morning, with information that was provided to them by a third party. So once again, it wasn't hacked; it was provided, as is the case with any journalist. They receive a tip, they receive a source, they go, cool, hit me up, what have we got? They do their due diligence on the work, and then they release it. In that instance, I believe there were a number of names that were compromised. I believe it was a government leak as well. In the video, Assange calls the government, a government contact. He calls, the Guardian, to ensure that there's a collaborative process before this is published. As we know, that actually takes place with a lot of the big organizations in government already, where they actually call to ask what they're okay to publish, not just legally, but just to make sure that things are okay. A lot of the time, to kind of keep that lane, and keep the sort of, I guess, middle ground when you receive information about a story, and not to tread on people's toes too much. Some journalists may call the governments themselves through their contacts to make sure that they're not going too far with it. So that, again, we're getting about, half of what the actual story is. So with Assange, that was one of the processes, but Mark Davis confirmed that he was actually up far more than most journalists would be in that instance, and retracting as many names as possible before it was just not feasible, and they sort of published it. So,
yeah. Okay, so what's been happening? So post Belmar, or is he still in Belmar? Like, what's been going on?
Yeah, he's still in Belmar now. So we're coming up to over 2 years of him being in that prison and in that state, what some have called solitary confinement as well. And during that time, there's been a number of hearings on his extradition that's taken place in London. The nature of those hearings and those trials have also been quite interesting. I think, we can pick, there's a lot of, let's say, dodgy aspects that have taken place all along this process, whether it's spying in the embassy, whether it's, spying and bugging of him and his lawyers consulting during that time, whether it's, from Amnesty's point of view, the inability to observe one of his hearings the morning of, after being granted access, then it being retracted as people were arriving, amongst many other NGOs that were trying to observe the trial, which is, obviously part of the independent fair trial process, is to have these third parties there. He was held behind a glass, barrier as well. So yeah, it's certainly been a bit of a heavy-handed process. There's been some questions about the judges as well, their connections and backgrounds, and motives, and their track record in how they prosecute. So he's gone through these stages. Early January was the biggest one so far. A lot of people were hoping that there might be a pardon, whether it was from Biden or Trump at that time. I think Trump specifically at that specific time. But obviously none of those things happened. And in fact, Biden and the DOJ have been even more assertive in ensuring that the trial takes place. A lot of their responses are pretty vague. They kind of tiptoe around any judgment. The answer is generally, we'll let the process of law take place. So what actually happened was,
this is like against the law, like against international law, right? Like what's going on doesn't follow the rules that they claim to be pointing towards.
Yeah,
or adhering to.
Correct. There's a number of contentious points there, and there's one more thing I'll just finish up, is that in January, that was the lead up to one of the biggest or most pivotal moments, because it was basically deciding if he would be extradited or not. The judge actually ruled that he couldn't be extradited, and it was purely based on risk to his health grounds. So there was no acknowledgement of, again, freedom of speech, freedom of press, a lot of the points that most of the people campaigning for this were talking about. It was simply
and points that are very, very in the minds of the people today, right?
Oh yeah, absolutely. It's one of the most topical, points that people converse about these days, and again, this represents it perfectly. And I would just implore people to kind of look past the, different character aspects or fringe aspects of this overall case, and just focus on the principles and his health. Right, as ultimately that's what it comes down to, and they're the points that actually do impact us as part of a democracy, as a nation, and as part of global citizens and international law protections. But yeah, as I mentioned, he was ruled. It was ruled that he couldn't be extradited purely because he may be able to harm himself if he was to be sent to the US, and wise enough to harm himself if need be. There wasn't. There was a level of doubt about his treatment in prison over in the US as well. So the US actually appealed. There was an opportunity to drop the charges after that, but no, they came back twice as hard. They decided to appeal that premise itself, which they actually were granted the right to, which is where we find ourselves 2 days before the beginning of this final verdict, which is whether he will be extradited or not. Couple more things to quickly point out that have happened in recent times, which factor into this overall aspect. But there was a major witness, which was a big part of the US case, who had said to have worked with Julian in the past at WikiLeaks, and actually acquired, or actually had been asked to hack information by him. That was a big part of the case that the US was putting forward, right? In the last few months, it was actually proven that he had lied about all of that. And he had admitted it himself. He'd actually said that he was granted immunity from his previous crimes as somebody who had done all sorts of really horrendous, crimes in the past. And he was working with them in order to be granted immunity, and he was willing to sort of go on the stand and talk about.
So, like, just to make this clear,
yeah,
there's this guy with a criminal record. He's a dodgy bastard, and the government's like, right, we will, wipe your record if you lie about about working with Assange and saying that you were hacking stuff. So if you do that, we'll wipe it. And then that came out recently, and that's all gone.
And that's kind of blown over. I don't think it was in any major newspaper as well. I think it was pretty, alternative news, and you had to dig to find the information. The only thing is that, we're not sure if he was obviously told to lie, but there was a deal where if he was to push a certain narrative, which he then later said was a lie, in exchange for diplomatic immunity, or for immunity from his previous crimes, he'd be fine. And during that time, he was actually still committing crimes, which is the most fascinating thing. So that kind of cracked a massive hole open. A lot of people, his lawyers, like Jen Robinson, Kristen Ramson from WikiLeaks, the head of WikiLeaks, mentioned this. Noam Chomsky, a lot of people that are connected to this were all pushing this aspect of the case forward so that people could realize the nature of the process, and why there were massive cracks and gaps in the justice process, right?
Yeah, and I guess one more point to make clear is I guess before we do that, what's happening this week? Like, where are we at?
Yeah, so 27th and the 28th of October are the 2 days, of the hearing. Basically, it is going to be a decision on whether he'll be extradited or not. The important thing to understand here is that regardless of the decision, it can still be appealed. So whether it's a yes, whether it's a no, either party can still go through that process. So, as I mentioned, that just delays things again for at least, let's say, a year and a half, which all works against, his health and his ability to survive. So it still is a symbolic decision, because if it is ruled that he can be extradited, that is still on the record. That's a huge signal to the world, again, to publishers who are thinking about publishing information that is true, that is really important for us to know before we make any decisions, before we vote. And they might go, you know what? I don't think I can do it. I just don't want to risk it. I don't want that kind of heat. I don't want to be treated the same. And
Doesn't matter where in the world you are. Does not matter. You can get
exactly.
like they can come for you.
They can come to you. They can come to you.
Yeah.
And you know, this is a different landscape that we all live in and operate in now. This is an online world. I think I saw a stat that in the US, people spend about 12 to 13 hours of their day on their phones, on, you know, looking at media as well. So, you know, as we are more and more connected online, precedents like this are just not the right example to set to a society that is defined by the informational inputs that they take in. And regardless of what you think about Julian as an individual, regardless of your perspectives on, you know, certain aspects of the case, the trial, whatever it may be, it does all come back to those basic human right principles that we all actually have to ensure, you know, are held together, and not just trust that they will be. And that's what this case represents. So.
And this fits into conversations that you and I have had numerous times over the past couple of months. You know, I work at Idea Market. We're trying to, you know, we want to be the literal marketplace for ideas. You know, trying to take away the ability for mainstream media and these institutions to be arbiters of credibility. We want to like create a decentralized mechanism to make that happen. And you with thinkers, and you know, you're bang on with like, we are the products of we are the products of our information environments. We like our values, the decisions that we make are all a product of the information that we're exposed to. And if there are people controlling the information, like if people are controlling what we're exposed to, they are controlling what values we hold, what decisions we make, what we talk about. Like, it's not even about it. And this is something that we've seen more recently over the past year, particularly with UFOs. Like, people have been talking about UFOs for a long time. Like, I've seen things. I've seen things, man. It wasn't too bad. It was just orbs in the sky. But actually, I actually covered that with Mike, the CEO of Idea Market, on the podcast that I did with him. But we've known about these things for a long time. But it's only when the corporate media starts talking about it, or when the US government comes out with something, that it becomes mainstream, and then it becomes okay to speak about. So this control, like, the one thing I'll just say is, the structures that are built on falsehoods crumble. And the same is true for our societies. And this is what we're talking about with the Assange case.
100%. You know, it can't be understated. It can't be understated, because just imagine what our viewpoints and perspectives would be on governments, on war, on what goes on if these leaks didn't happen. Think about how blinded we would actually be. We'd just be going about our days. You know, I 100% understand as well that this issue may not be the first and foremost priority, banging people in the head each day when there's so many other things. And obviously everybody has a certain capacity of how many issues they can take on and campaign for at once, right? But the reiteration there again is that it underpins the quality of life you even have. It underpins the opportunity, the options that your children have if they're only operating within a certain sphere of understanding or knowledge, right? It underpins the human experience. You know, we are nothing but the information and the knowledge that we take in. So I think that it's such an important tenet and pillar that we all have to stand up and protect in whatever way we can. And as I said at the start, every little bit of action, whether it's a conversation, whether it's just whether it's just giving new information a chance, you know, whether it's signing a petition, whether it's writing to your MP, whether it's whatever it may be, all those little things add up. And it's actually a signal about who you are as a human and what you represent and the life you want to live, which automatically will have a knock-on effect to other people. So, you know, I think we've connected on this as well on many times, but as we can see with Web 3.0, the way that things are going, there's going to be more and more online interaction and signaling, let's say, of who we are. who our tribe is, what we believe in, what NFTs we have, where we're sort of aligned to as a community. But I think without a principle like this, without defending all information, without defending accurate information and a comfortable space for people to push that, to publish that, whether it's whistleblowers or an individual, we might come across information that's really important that we're unable to put forward. If we don't have that, we're just going to replicate the systems, I suppose, that have taken place for quite a while and remain, in the dark, just seeing a portion or a shade of what's really taking place. So yeah, just to kind of reiterate and drill that home.
I do have some faith in the recent developments in Web3, and well, not in recent developments, but what the suite of technology means for publishing, among other things. But
100%.
These technologies make it possible, or make it more easy for one to publish things anonymously. So,
Yes.
The Julian Assange of tomorrow could be a guy with a cartoon profile picture and a pseudonym, and no one knows who this person is, but the contents that they are publishing, like the documents that they are publishing, are verified as legitimate. So I do have faith there. I do have faith in these technologies. What I do not have faith in, especially given this, the context of our conversation, Julian Assange, is our governments and them protecting our freedoms, which many of them say are, fundamental to our societies, right? Particularly the US. Freedom of speech. Find me a country who cares more about freedom of speech than the US. They've got the sock puppet over here, while they've got the silencer over here.
It's so true. It's so true. And I think it's I feel as though as we see the global power structures start to change, the global hegemony start to I think we've heard this from Balaji as well. He's kind of described the three main structures. It's woke, communist China, and crypto. And these are the major three players that are now intersecting and ascending, that are going to shape the next however many decades. So I think with what China is able to do based on their system and and society that they've created, and the US also trying to remain competitive, it's kind of like the enemy. You'd rather know what's in front of you than have someone go, no, we're all about freedom, but actually, right? And that's what's harnessed once again by China against the US. So I think I actually sense, and this was actually mentioned by Stella Morris recently too, that there is certainly a trend towards authoritarianism, and that's going to happen. I mean, I have my own views on why that's happening, but I feel as though that it's certainly heading in that direction. And this case actually concerns all of us, because it is one of the most pivotal counter fights, I guess, against that trend. And if he is to be extradited, it'll be, that's on all of us. We all lose, It's only detrimental to everybody. So it's a bit of a wedge there. And I think it's people will look back, in the history books and in the future, and certainly look at people like Snowden and Assange and realize that, first of all, how important were the roles that they played? And secondly, can you believe that people didn't give it the time of day, or that people weren't aware of the implications? Because when you look back and connect the dots, it was so obvious. So I think if we're not fighting now, when can you? It's got to be now. It's got to be everything now.
And if we don't fight now, the people who write those history books, maybe those who, maybe the winners that we do not want, and these details will not be in those history books.
And we know who writes. We know who writes history, right?
Yeah. So, what can people do now? Those listening, I know you've recently written, or you or Amnesty International has put together a letter, because we're in Australia. both in Sydney, actually. This is just a lot more easier for us to do through video. So what can people listening who are firstly in Australia do?
I think, I think there's a combination of things that'll be impactful and hopefully add up. I think firstly, as you said, from Amnesty's point of view, we've created a direct sort of line to Scott Morrison and Maurice Payne, and written a letter which was sent over today, asking them to intervene in this trial, to call the US and ask them to drop the charges because he's an Australian citizen, because it's gone on for long enough, because there was 120,000 Australians that signed Amnesty's 500,000 strong global petition to release Assange, that it's becoming an election issue, that many Labor Party members are supporting it. We've got independents, we've got Greens, we've got people from all across the spectrum, whether you're left, right, Liberal, Labor, whatever you want to call it, Democrat, Republican, it doesn't matter. It's one of those cases that actually unites everybody rather than divides us, which is happening far too often in other areas. So I think, and that will actually be linked, here. So one of the most powerful things people can do, and it always is, write to your local MP. I've seen firsthand at Amnesty how impactful that can be in getting meetings with MPs, with having them put it on an agenda, with having them speak about it in public. It's really hitting as close to home as possible when it comes to getting votes before an election, an upcoming election. So the timing's actually good for that. So if anyone listening in wants to work off the Amnesty letter in terms of tone and content, certainly that call to action to ask Maurice Payne and Morrison to call the US and ask them to stop the trial on behalf of Australians, from a human rights perspective, and just, generally speaking, for an Aussie citizen, obviously, that'd be great. Secondly, I've got a link to the Amnesty petition calling for his charges to be dropped. As that keeps ticking along, that has more onus. And I think, obviously, just speaking about it to people, diving into the information and researching it. I think the biggest thing I learned was, it's so easy to kind of brush the case aside because it's complex. One of my best friends was actually diving into this information a few years ago and was feeding it to me, being like, just make sure you look at this part. I can't believe people are missing this. And I used to read it and go, wow, like none of this is being covered. And it was just those conversations that, while I did have some interest, it helped to spur things along. And that's how much things can be impacted when you talk to people. So read the information about the case. There are plenty of nice little summaries and videos. There's actually a documentary coming out that his brother put together, and that'll be released in movies. I think it's going to be at the Ritz early November. And I don't want to get the name wrong. It was a unique name, but it's actually from what I understand, one of the best covered documentaries on the truth of the situation. It actually follows his father around the US and his brother as they spoke at different cities in America, with a lot of other notable sort of supporters. So just learning more about the case, just not underestimating how important it is. And finally, if you do want to take action directly, towards the US, there's actually a link where you can email the White House directly. Scott Ludlam, who I did a talk with a few months ago, leveraged that tactic, and it's really quite easy, that link, to kind of fill it out. I'm based here. Here's my message. Submit it. All these little things, when they happen around the world, do add up. I've seen it with Manus and Nauru in Australia. I've seen it with individuals at risk around the world, and also large groups of people. So don't think that it won't have an impact. Yeah.
And just on one thing that you said, I guess towards the beginning of that, you said it is complex, but the details are complex. But what's at stake is not. There's a guy who published, a team, WikiLeaks, who published documents that were leaked to them, and they were like, this guy, Julian Assange, is not an Australian, and what's happening is a country is just reaching across the world and saying, we want this guy, we want to punish him for basically embarrassing us and for making our citizens and the rest of the world aware of our wrongdoings.
Correct.
And that's what's at stake. It's if this trial goes ahead, if he gets whatever the term is,
Extradited. Yeah.
extradited. Yep. If he gets extradited, then it can affect all of us. So
Absolutely.
so it is complex, but it's at the end of the day, it's pretty simple. It's like, are you a citizen of your own country? You know, are we sovereign? It's kind of a question of sovereignty in a way.
It is. Also another conversation. But
yeah, I mean, I am all for weakening sovereignty, which I know we both know about. Something that probably requires a bit more of a discussion. But yeah, well, so Chamira, where can people? I know you've spoken about some links. Where can people find out more? Where can people find out about what Amnesty's up to? How can people keep up to date with you online?
Yeah, sure. I think first of all, if you're interested in the case, it'd be worthwhile looking at again those documentaries. One, Passerelli is a Spanish documentary maker who made also a fantastic one, which we can include in the links as watching material. Go to WikiLeaks directly and just start reading the breakdown of leaks they've had from different organizations, companies, politicians, whatever it may be, and your mind will be blown, as to how blatant a lot of the activity is. I think that the important thing there too is that it shows you how the world works, shows you how things get done, shows you what the conversations are like behind closed doors, and then the kind of guise you have in public, which is that things are all, a-okay, it's the bureaucracy's ticking along, etc. It's just good to know. The more informed we all are as individuals, as a society, the better. Full stop. Right? The more we can reach our heights as a race, as a humanity, the better we can understand where other people are coming from. We can understand systems and processes, and then we're more likely to actually build a compassionate, and an empathetic society rather than one that just is siloed based on the information we get. So look at those documentaries, look at WikiLeaks. That's the information straight from the horse's mouth. Amnesty has a number of links on the website. If you just search Assange on the main website, there'll be a letter. You can find a letter that was sent to Morrison in January calling for him to intervene. This is a follow-up. You can find our petition and a bit more backstory, and follow the awesome groups, the heart of activism, other groups that just plug along, and they just People for Assange, Don't Extradite Assange, all these sort of organizations are just there day in, day out, that when they're coupled with an amnesty, with a notable person, a celebrity, an institution, a government, whatever it may be, they all come together, and I just feel like they underpin it with their consistent messaging. So join them, look at them as well, and yeah, for me, you can follow me on Twitter, and I will probably start writing a bit more on Medium over the near future.
Or Mira.
Yeah, always open to chat and connect with people on this and anything else.
And check out thinkers.io.
Yes.
Yep.
Speaking of critical thinking and context in media,
exactly.
Nothing better. Yeah.
Well, Chamira, thank you very much for taking the time today and for all the work you've done on the Assange campaign over the years. We're all better off for it. You're a good man.
Thank you, brother. I appreciate it, man. And thanks for having me. Keep doing what you're doing.
All righty.
Thank you, man.